The moment this story broke, fans thought they had seen everything already when it comes to Meri Brown and Kody Brown. But what unfolded next caught even longtime Sister Wives viewers completely off guard, because this wasn't just another emotional argument or tense confessional moment. This was something far deeper, far more calculated, and far more devastating for Kody than anyone expected. And the reason this moment matters so much is because for the first time in years, Meri wasn't reacting emotionally, she wasn't pleading, she wasn't explaining herself. She was finally responding with structure, documentation, timelines, and a level of calm authority that instantly shifted the power dynamic that had defined this family for more than a decade. And if you've ever felt frustrated watching Meri be dismissed, ignored, or rewritten out of her own story, then what you're about to hear explains exactly why so many fans are calling this the turning point Kody never saw coming. So make sure you stay until the end, because the final details of this situation completely reframe everything we thought we knew about control, loyalty, and accountability in this family for years. Meri Brown has been portrayed as the difficult one, the emotional one, the problem wife. A narrative that didn't just appear on television, but slowly embedded itself into fan conversations, recaps, and even how Kody himself spoke about her publicly. Yet, when you look at the actual timeline, the legal decisions, and the documented choices that were made, a very different story begins to emerge. And it's a story that starts back in 2014 when Meri legally divorced Kody so he could adopt Robyn's children, a move that was framed as selfless and necessary, but one that quietly stripped Meri of legal protections she never fully regained. And this is important because that decision didn't just change their marital status. It changed how assets, property, and authority were distributed moving forward. Something Kody benefited from immediately, while Meri was expected to trust. That fairness would somehow come later. Fast forward to the Flagstaff move and the purchase of Coyote Pass, a decision Kody insisted would unite the family, but instead became one of the most controversial financial choices in the show's history. And here's where the tension really starts to build. Because while viewers were distracted by interpersonal drama, Meri was quietly continuing to contribute financially, paying into shared assets while being emotionally isolated, living alone, and repeatedly told there was no romantic future with Kody, and that contradiction matters. Because legally and ethically, contribution without access or decision-making power is where disputes are born. And this is exactly the issue that began surfacing behind the scenes. Sources close to the situation have confirmed that Meri began requesting clarity. Not reconciliation, not affection, but clarity on property division, clarity on financial contributions, clarity on whether she was expected to continue investing in assets she had no control over. And according to multiple insiders, those requests were either delayed, dismissed, or redirected, and that's when Meri did something fans weren't expecting. She stopped asking emotionally and started documenting everything. Timelines, payments, conversations, on-camera statements, off-camera agreements. And once those records were formally reviewed, the narrative that Kody had relied on for years began to crack. This is the part of the story where people keep asking, how did a judge get involved? And the answer is more grounded than the shock headlines suggest. Because this wasn't about some dramatic courtroom showdown with cameras rolling. It was about formal review, filings, and legal evaluation tied to property interests and financial responsibility. And when those documents were examined, the conclusion was simple but devastating. Meri's financial contributions were real, ongoing, and disproportionate to the access and benefits she received in return. And that finding alone changed everything. Because suddenly Kody's long-standing claim that Meri was choosing distance didn't hold up against the paper trail. That showed consistent participation without reciprocal authority, and this is where Robyn's reaction becomes impossible to ignore, because while Meri stayed silent publicly, Robyn had repeatedly framed herself as the peacemaker, the one advocating for unity, yet privately. This evaluation exposed how uneven the distribution of support and security had become. And when that reality surfaced, insiders say Robyn was blindsided, not because Meri was wrong, but because Meri was prepared, and that distinction matters. Because preparedness is what shifts outcomes, not emotion. If you're still watching at this point, take a second and comment below whether you think Meri should have spoken up sooner or if staying quiet until she had everything documented was the smartest move. Because fans are completely split on this. And I want to know where you stand. What makes this situation even more intense is that Kody's own on-camera statements from past seasons were reportedly referenced. Statements where he openly said he did not consider himself married to Meri in any meaningful way, statements where he questioned why she even stayed. Statements that played well for dramatic television, but became liabilities when viewed through a legal and financial lens. Because once those clips were contextualized, alongside proof of contribution, the contradiction was impossible to ignore. And that's when the balance of credibility shifted. People close to production have hinted that this is one of the reasons Kody's tone changed so dramatically in later interviews. Because for the first time, the story wasn't being shaped by who spoke the loudest or who controlled the narrative emotionally. It was being shaped by evidence, and evidence doesn't respond to intimidation or deflection. It simply exists, and when it exists in Meri's favor, it forces a reckoning Kody had avoided for years. Robyn's breakdown, according to insiders, didn't come from anger but from shock because the structure she believed protected her position suddenly felt unstable, and that's a crucial psychological moment. Because when someone believes a system is fair only to discover it's been uneven all along, the emotional fallout is intense. And that's exactly what viewers are beginning to sense now as new details continue to surface. Before we go any further, make sure you're subscribed if you want updates as this story develops. Because the next phase reveals even more about how power quietly shifted long before anyone noticed. And if you think this kind of deep breakdown matters more than surface-level drama, hit the like button so this reaches other fans who want real context, not just headlines. As we move deeper into this story, one thing becomes clear. This was never about Meri winning against Kody in a dramatic sense. It was about finally being acknowledged as someone whose contributions mattered. And once that acknowledgement happened in a formal setting, Kody was left stunned. Not because he lost control publicly, but because he lost control privately, where it matters most, and that's a loss no amount of television spin can fix. Stay with me. Because in part 2, we're going to break down exactly how Kody's own words came back to haunt him. Why Robyn's role looks very different when viewed through this new lens. And the one decision Meri made next that no one was prepared for, including production. This is where the story stops being about what Meri did and starts becoming about what Kody said. Because the most damaging evidence against him wasn't hidden in bank statements or property maps. It was sitting in plain sight for years, broadcast to millions, replayed in recaps, clipped on social media, and dismissed as just another example of Kody being blunt, emotional, or dramatic. But once those words were removed from the reality TV bubble and placed into a serious, evaluative context, they stopped sounding like opinions and started sounding like admissions. And that shift is exactly why this situation escalated so quickly behind the scenes for seasons. Kody openly stated that he did not feel married to Meri, that he had no interest in rebuilding intimacy, that he questioned why she even stayed. And at the time, many fans interpreted those statements as cruel but personal, yet when paired with proof that Meri was still financially contributing, still tied to shared property plans, still expected to play the role of a committed family member when it came to money and logistics, those same statements created a contradiction that could no longer be brushed off. Because you cannot publicly distance yourself from a relationship while privately benefiting from the structure of that relationship. And once that contradiction was formally examined, it placed Kody in an impossible position. What made this even More damaging is that Meri never had to accuse him of anything directly. She simply allowed the timeline to speak for itself. A timeline that showed years of financial participation overlapping, with years of emotional exclusion, and when that overlap was acknowledged, it reframed the entire dynamic from a broken marriage to an imbalanced arrangement. An imbalance is where accountability begins. Because once something is acknowledged as uneven, it demands correction. Robyn's role in all of this becomes far more complicated in part 2. Because while she has often been portrayed as the emotional center of the family, the one encouraging communication and reconciliation, the reality is that she benefited most from the legal and financial structure that followed Meri's divorce from Kody. And while that doesn't make Robyn responsible for every outcome, it does place her at the center of a system that became increasingly unbalanced over time. And when that system was questioned, her reaction was reportedly less defensive and more overwhelmed. Because stability feels very different when it's suddenly examined instead of assumed. According to insiders, Robyn struggled with the realization that Meri's silence was not submission, it was patience. And patience backed by preparation is far more powerful than confrontation, because it gives no warning. And when the conclusions began to lean in Meri's favor, Robyn was forced to confront the possibility that the family narrative she believed in was incomplete. And that realization alone is enough to emotionally destabilize anyone, especially when your identity is tied to harmony and unity. At this point in the story, viewers need to understand something crucial. This was not about punishing Kody, it was about correcting a structure that no longer matched reality. And when that correction started taking shape, it didn't just affect property or finances. It affected identity, hierarchy, and long-standing assumptions. Because Kody had positioned himself as the ultimate decision-maker for so long that being questioned, even indirectly, struck at the core of how he viewed his role in the family. This is where tension quietly escalated. Because once the imbalance was acknowledged, the next question became unavoidable. What happens next? And that question reportedly created serious anxiety within the family. Because resolution means change, and change threatens comfort even when comfort is unfair. And for Robyn, this meant facing the fear that the family structure she fought to preserve might not survive transparency. If you've made it this far, drop a comment answering this honestly. Do you think Kody underestimated Meri because she stayed quiet for so long? Or do you think he genuinely believed she would never challenge the arrangement? Because that difference completely changes how you interpret his reaction now. As the situation continued to unfold, Meri's demeanor remained steady, and that steadiness became one of the most unsettling elements for those around her. Because emotional reactions can be dismissed, but calm resolve backed by documentation cannot. And the more composed Meri appeared, the clearer it became that this was not a spur-of-the-moment response. It was the result of years of observation, reflection, and quiet decision-making. And that realization alone shifted how everyone involved viewed her. Meanwhile, Kody's public tone began to change subtly, less dismissive, more cautious. Because when control is challenged through structure, instead of emotion, it forces a different kind of response, one rooted in strategy rather than dominance. And insiders say that adjustment didn't come easily, because it required Kody to acknowledge limits he had never publicly faced before. Make sure you share this video with another Sister Wives fan who thinks they know this story already, because the deeper context completely changes how these moments look in hindsight. And if you're enjoying this breakdown, hit the like button so the algorithm knows fans want substance, not just surface-level drama. As part 2 comes to a close, one truth becomes impossible to ignore. Meri didn't win by fighting louder. She won by outlasting the narrative that painted her as powerless. And once that narrative collapsed, everything built on top of it became unstable, and that instability is exactly what set the stage for the most unexpected decision Meri made next. A decision that caught Kody, Robyn, and even longtime viewers completely off guard. Stay with me. Because in part 3, we're going to reveal how this moment changed Meri's future permanently. Why Kody's stunned reaction says more than any argument ever could, and the final emotional twist that no one saw coming, including the people who thought they understood this family best. This is where everything finally locks into place. Because the real impact of this moment isn't just what happened during the evaluation itself. It's what happened immediately after, when Meri made a decision that quietly but permanently altered her future. And this is the part of the story that explains why Kody's stunned reaction lingered long after the process concluded. Because for the first time, Meri wasn't waiting to see what he would decide. She had already decided for herself. Sources close to the situation say that once the conclusions were acknowledged and the imbalance was formally recognized, Meri didn't celebrate, she didn't gloat, and she didn't seek validation from anyone in the family. Instead, she did something far more telling. She disengaged emotionally with clarity. Not bitterness, clarity. And that distinction matters because bitterness keeps you tied to the conflict, while clarity allows you to move forward without needing permission. And that's exactly what Meri did. She stopped orienting her future around repairing something that had already been acknowledged as broken beyond repair. For Kody, this was the true shock, not the process itself, but the aftermath. Because for years he had operated under the assumption that Meri's presence, even in silence, meant leverage, meant optionality, meant control through uncertainty. But once Meri stopped seeking acknowledgement, stopped seeking inclusion, and started operating independently with confidence, that leverage disappeared. And people close to him say that's when the reality finally hit. This wasn't a temporary conflict, this was a permanent shift. Robyn's emotional response deepened during this phase, not because of anger or blame, but because the family identity she had worked so hard to preserve no longer made sense in the same way. And when identity fractures, it creates grief, even when no one is technically at fault. Because grief isn't always about loss, sometimes it's about realization. Realizing that something you believed was stable was actually conditional all along. And that realization can be overwhelming, especially when it unfolds quietly instead of explosively. What viewers may not fully appreciate yet is that Meri's decision didn't just affect her relationship with Kody, it altered how production, fans, and even other family members began to perceive her role, because strength expressed without hostility is difficult to dismiss. And once Meri stepped into that space, the old narrative no longer fit. And that's why so many fans now say they see her differently, not as someone left behind, but as someone who finally stepped forward on her own terms. Kody's stunned silence in the aftermath spoke volumes. Because for someone used to defining outcomes through reaction, authority, and emotion, being met with calm finality is disarming. And insiders suggest that this was the first time he truly understood that Meri's loyalty had ended long before the paperwork ever caught up, and that realization doesn't just challenge a relationship, it challenges self-perception. Because it forces you to ask whether control was ever as complete as you believed. If you're still watching right now, comment below and answer this honestly. Do you think Meri walking away with calm confidence was more powerful than any argument she could have made? Because fans are saying this might be the most quietly empowering moment in the entire series. As the dust settled, one thing became clear. Meri didn't need to destroy Kody publicly to reclaim herself. She simply needed the truth to be acknowledged, and once it was, she chose peace over performance. And that choice changed everything, because peace doesn't ask for approval, it just exists. And when someone reaches that point, the dynamic is permanently altered. No negotiations, no backtracking, no emotional leverage left to pull. This moment also sent a message to viewers who have followed this family for years. That endurance without agency eventually becomes self-erasure, and Meri's decision marked the end of that cycle, not just for her, but symbolically for anyone who saw themselves in her story. And that's why this moment resonates far beyond reality television drama, because it reflects something deeply human. The moment you realize you don't need to prove your worth to anyone. Who benefited from your silence? Before we close, make sure you subscribe if you want continued deep dives like this that go beyond surface level recaps and actually explain why these moments matter. And share this video with someone who's followed sister wives from the beginning, because this context changes everything. And finally, hit the like button if you believe this chapter marks the most powerful transformation Meri has ever made. In the end, Kody wasn't defeated by a judge, by paperwork, or by public opinion. He was undone by time, by consistency, and by a woman who finally realized she didn't need to fight to be free. And that realization is what makes this moment unforgettable. Because the loudest victory here wasn't spoken at all, it was lived. And that's why this story will be remembered long after the shock fades, not as a courtroom bombshell, but as the quiet end of a dynamic that could no longer survive the truth.